Hi, it's Katrina! The Vinca. The Vinca civilization proves that women have been dressing to impress for at least 7,500 years. That is, according to the Neolithic figurines found at the Ploknik archaeological site in Serbia. Recent excavations at this site, which was once part of Europe's biggest prehistoric civilization called the Vinca, point to an ancient metropolis with a large degree of sophistication and an unusual lust for fashion. The Neolithic settlement is situated in a valley deep in the wilderness of what is today modern Serbia. The figurines discovered here display young women beautifully dressed in miniskirts and short tops, and even wearing bracelets around their arms. The tribe that made these figurines is unknown, but they definitely lived sometime between 5,400 and 4,700 BC. They practiced art and metallurgy, and they even built a thermal well near their settlement that could be the oldest spa in Europe. According to a local archaeologist, they also produced about 60 different forms of pottery and figures to represent their deities, and probably just because they liked art. But how could the tribe be unknown when they were part of the Vinca civilization? It's because we know the culture flourished in what is today Bosnia, Romania, Serbia, and Macedonia from 5500 to 4000 BC. The culture was named Vinca after the small village near Belgrade, where archaeologists found 8 Neolithic villages. These were all part of the mysterious Vinca culture, one of the oldest civilizations in Europe. But scientists don't actually know the names of the individual tribes, who their leaders were, or even what gods they worshipped. We just know that they really liked fashion. Unknown Kingdom. Archaeologists working in Turkey have just discovered a previously unknown people who may have played a major role in the ancient world. They ruled a massive part of what is today Turkey, and if the archaeological evidence is to be believed, they even defeated the notorious King Midas. Remember him? He was said to have the golden touch, where everything turned to gold. Professor James Osborne from the Oriental Institute went on record saying, "We had no idea about this kingdom. It was completely unknown." But everything changed when a farmer found a strange large stone on his property. He was digging in a nearby canal when he found the stone and noticed it had mysterious writing on it. At the time of his discovery, there were researchers nearby exploring a prehistoric mound site. So he told them about it and they came over to take a look. What they found shocked them to the core. The stone was sticking out of the water and they had to wade into the canal up to their waist to inspect it. The archaeologists recognized the writing on the stone immediately as Luwian, an ancient language used in both the Bronze Age and Iron Age in Turkey. It turned out that the inscription was written by an unknown king named Hartapu, and he was boasting how he had defeated King Midas and the Kingdom of Phrygia. Considering Phrygia and King Midas were quite powerful back in their day, whoever these ancient people were, led by the mysterious King Hartapu, must have been quite fierce. So what happened to these powerful lost people? Why have we never heard of them before? And that, my friends, remains a mystery. The Gladiatrix. Little do most people know there was a group of ancient people called the Gladiatrix. They weren't a race of people or the byproduct of a mysterious society. Instead, they were the female equivalent of male Roman gladiators. The Gladiatrix, or female gladiators, would battle against each other or wild animals during arena games and celebrations. But don't get too excited just yet, as these ladies of the ring weren't treated quite as well as the female fighters of today. There wasn't even a word in Latin for a gladiatrix. It's a modern term that was made up. The Gladiatrix began as more of a derogatory or joking event to entertain the spectators, which were mostly men. In reality, they were considered quite rare. The Roman poet Decimus Junius Juvenalis said that gladiatrix trained using the same methods and weapons as their male counterparts, though no records have been found in any of the gladiator training schools that talk about women. But here's where things get really odd with the gladiatrix. Unlike gladiators, who were mostly slaves, gladiatrix could be women of any class, both high and low. It seems any woman who wanted to fight could be trained and let loose in the arena. This went on until about 200 AD, when Emperor Septimius Severus banned women from the arena, claiming that too many jokes were being made about upper-class women, so no more women were allowed to participate in the games. The Neragic Civilization. The Neragic Civilization lived on the island of Sardinia in the Mediterranean. But even though we know of their existence, We don't know much about what they did, who they were, or even where they went. Archaeologists have found structures, graves, pieces of art, and figurines, and yet there is a huge gap in the knowledge of the Neragic. We know that they lived during the Bronze Age and Iron Age, and that their best-known structures left behind were the Neragic towers. There are about 7,000 of these towers scattered across Sardinia, though at the time the civilization was thriving, there may have been up to 30,000 on the island. That's a lot for a limited space. The towers were all circular, each with their own flat rooftop, and the earliest one found dates back to the 18th century BC. What the towers were used for is still up for debate, with some saying they were used as rooftops, and others saying they were used as terraces. They may have even been dwellings or just silos for storing liquids and dry foods. It's hard to say since some of them were up to 90 feet tall. Besides the towers, the Neragic left behind giant megalithic graves, with each one stuffed with about a dozen bodies and several hundred graves in a single cemetery. Some of these burial chambers go 60 feet underground. Scholars believe the Neragic thought that their dead would be transformed into gods when buried so deep underground. But as for what the civilization believed in, nobody really knows. They lived on the island for about 5,000 years and then vanished mysteriously for unknown reasons, just before the Carthaginian conquest of the 6th century BC. The Indus Utopia. The Indus civilization thrived for roughly 700 years without having a single war. Archaeologists have referred to this civilization as the first paradise on Earth. They had no inequality, no royalty, no weapons, and apparently no way to defend themselves, since it looks like they didn't need to. They also had 54 cities that were governed by educated officials and a prince who was elected to serve for life. These people saw no glory in fighting and may have been the first practitioners of Hinduism. The Indus people lived from between 2600 to 1900 BC, occupying roughly 1,000 settlements in what is today Pakistan, Afghanistan, and India. The remains of the civilization were only recently discovered in the 1920s, with all signs pointing to an extremely advanced society and one of the greatest in history. They had a trade network that stretched to the Arabian Sea, and archaeologists have even found artifacts from the Indus civilization in Mesopotamian cities like Akkad and Ur. The biggest Indus cities were Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, and even though they were built thousands of years ago, they were extremely advanced, even by today's standards. They had streets that were properly planned, sewage systems that actually worked, and a huge brick water tank called the Great Bath, which should be considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The Indus Valley Civilization even figured out the written word, creating their very own mysterious script that has left archaeologists stumped because they can't decipher it. But sadly, the society fell off the map about 4,000 years ago, and nobody knows why. It could be that other civilizations saw their peaceful ways as weakness and destroyed them. But for now, the reasons remain unclear. The Akamenid Empire. At around the time the Assyrians were building their new empire, a group of tribes were settling what is today Iran. These people were breaking away from their old nomadic lifestyles to start cities. The tribes came together and formed what we know of today as the Akamenid Empire, or the First Persian Empire. It was founded by Cyrus the Great and reached its peak under the rule of Xerxes I. You know, the bad guy from the movie 300. Xerxes conquered almost all of ancient Greece, even taking the city of Athens in 480 BC. At that point, the Akamenid Empire stretched all across the Balkans and as far as the Indus Valley, where the Indus Civilization once flourished that I just told you about. One of the reasons the Akamenid Empire was so impressive is that the world had never seen an empire of such magnitude. It covered an area of about 2.1 million square miles, and amazingly it came about simply because of the Iranian tribes who settled what became known as Persia in the 7th century BC. Within just 300 years, the tribes had transformed into the greatest empire on Earth. But other than just conquering pretty much everyone, what was the Akamenid Empire known for? Well, they began to create roads across the world, and they started the first postal system, and they were one of the first people to use an official language across all of their territories. They also developed civil services, they maintained the largest standing army on the planet, and they would become an inspiration to Alexander the Great many years later, when he conquered the Akamenid Empire in 330 BC. Want to give a big shout out to Mick Gerard Alvarado and Romeo Tayam. Thanks so much for supporting this channel. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family. Dilmoon Empire. The Dilmoon Civilization was located on the Arabian Peninsula and is significantly less famous than the other big civilizations that sprang up around the same time, such as Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. Today, the ruins of the Dilmoon Civilization can be found in Bahrain. But what's really interesting about Dilmoon is that it was kind of a mythological place in ancient times. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, arguably the first great work of literature ever written, the hero must seek out Utnapishtim to gain immortality, and Utnapishtim hails from Dilmoon. Dilmoon is mentioned in the myth of Enki and Nihursag as well, with the nation being depicted as an earthly paradise. But Dilmoon was by no means mythical. It was a very real civilization that has even been found in records from Sumer and Babylon. The Dilmoon people also traded with the Indus Valley people, but tracking down the actual archaeological evidence has been a bit trickier. Dilmoon was definitely part of Bahrain, but may have also stretched into Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Excavations in the 1950s revealed an ancient harbor that may have been the capital of Dilmoon near the current village of Sar, removing any doubt once and for all that Dilmoon was indeed one of the first major civilizations. India's Illuminati. There was once a secret order of people in India that many people today have never heard of. This secret cult preceded any evidence of the Illuminati. The group was founded by the great emperor Ashoka around the year 270 BC. Ashoka ruled the Maurya dynasty in India and is considered one of the greatest Indian rulers in history. As far as the legend goes, Ashoka formed the secret society of the Nine Unknown. 9 unknown men were chosen to preserve secret knowledge and prevent it from getting into the hands of the public. Each person was given a powerful book of knowledge to memorize and keep safe. Some claims say that the books contain knowledge of things like time travel, aliens, and other revelations that could spark panic if unleashed to the people. But just whatever happened to these 9 unknown men? It's believed that they kept their books of knowledge until such a time when they needed successors. Then each member found another worthy individual and passed on the responsibility, and that has been happening for over 2,000 years. There is absolutely zero evidence of this except hearsay and vague historical records. But that's how the legend goes. The Nok. The Nok culture lived in what is today Nigeria. Nigeria is one of the most populous nations in Africa today, and one of the strongest, and this history of strength and perseverance goes back thousands of years. The Nok culture was one of the first in Africa to master ironworking. They left behind amazing relics of artistic value and some pretty impressive terracotta sculptures. However, not much is known about these people or their belief system. According to National Geographic, the Nok culture existed from between 500 BC to 200 AD. They farmed crops, they figured out how to use iron tools, and they mastered the art of sculpting. Up until 1943, this culture had been completely unknown even to the locals. Near the modern town of Nok, archaeologist Bernard found the sculptures of human heads, animals, and humanoid figurines with massive triangular-shaped eyes that almost look like aliens. These weird sculptures have been found throughout an area of about 30,000 square miles. Archaeologists have even analyzed the clay used to build the sculptures, determining that all the clay came from a single source that was probably controlled by a central authority. As for ruins, well, not much has been found. The origin of the Nok people is still a mystery, as basically nothing except their bizarre sculptures have been found. Hegra. Hegra is an ancient city in Saudi Arabia that looks an awful lot like Petra in nearby Jordan. It is an impressive ruin carved into the side of a massive rock in the middle of a barren desert. The ruin was left behind by a civilization known as the Nabateans. If you haven't heard of these guys before, you're not alone. Even though they were an intriguing civilization that thrived throughout Arabia, there isn't much known about them. They lived in the desert and practiced a nomadic lifestyle before they turned into merchants that controlled the spice trade going through Arabia to places like Egypt and Mesopotamia. These were the people who led camel caravans filled with peppercorn, sugar, and cotton through the desert to be traded to kingdoms in the Mediterranean. The Nabateans were also the suppliers of things like frankincense and myrrh, which were crucial for religious ceremonies further west. These people prospered in the desert from between 400 BC until 100 AD. Everything was going just fine until the Roman Empire annexed much of their land and absorbed the Nabateans. By the time the Roman Empire fell, Nabatea was a distant memory. Secret Lost City. Many significant discoveries have just been made thanks to new technology. Using LiDAR, which stands for Light Detection and Ranging, and 4K cameras mounted on drones, archaeologists have uncovered some secrets of a lost city in Israel with a history that goes back at least 2,600 years. For centuries, this city was buried beneath the sand, and it's only just starting to emerge from the layers of sediment. Located south of Jerusalem, the village is called Beit Lehi Beit Loya, and it's taking a whole lot of cutting-edge technology and physical excavations to get to the bottom of this historic mystery. From what archaeologists can tell so far, the village was first settled by Jewish people sometime around the late 6th century BC, then later abandoned, rebuilt, abandoned, and rebuilt. Over the years, it was taken over by pagans, Jews, Christians, and Muslims. But by the 14th century AD, the city had just kind of fallen off the map. The remains were first rediscovered in 1899, but then ignored until the 1980s, when a team of researchers from Hebrew University were funded by donors in Utah, of all places. They then went on to discover the remains of a Byzantine church with mosaic floors in almost perfect condition. Now, researchers have uncovered only about 20% of the extremely large village. A village they say may actually be the biblical site in which the legendary Samson killed 1,000 Philistines, using nothing but the jawbone of a donkey. Kalatka Darband. Way back somewhere around 331 BC, Alexander the Great took over a place called Kalatka Darband on his way to conquer Persia. While on the hunt for Darius III, the bustling city had the misfortune to be in his way, and a bit after Alexander passed through, the city vanished from all historical records. There's been no trace of it for about 2,000 years. But just recently, archaeologists have announced to the world that they believe they have finally uncovered this mysterious ancient city. As Live Science reports, in the 1960s, spy satellite imagery revealed an ancient site near the Zagros Mountains in Iraq, but the information was classified. When it was finally made public, archaeologists from the British Museum couldn't wait to get their hands on it, and were finally able to send drones over the area. Located in the Kurdish region of Iraq, lead investigator John McGuinness told The Times that because of the turbulence in the region, archaeologists weren't able to begin excavating until 2016, and then that was interrupted again by the coronavirus situation. But just why is this city so important? When archaeologists were able to finally get their hands dirty, they found a treasure trove of ancient artifacts. The site contains a large fort as well as several large structures to press grapes and make wine. There were many buildings with Greco-Roman architecture and statues and ceramics found all over the site, representing Greek gods. Nearby, there is evidence of an even older settlement that dates back to the Assyrians during the 8th century BC. This lost city is a wonderful representation of what it would have been like during the time of Alexander the Great. But what archaeologists really want to know is why the city disappeared from all records, whether it was abandoned slowly after Alexander's conquest, or if the great conqueror destroyed the entire place on his way through. City of Troy. The legendary city of Troy has been around for a very long time, and for thousands of years, people thought it was just a myth. The city was immortalized in Homer's great epic, the Iliad, but it was also a very real place located on the Turkish coast. Legend says that Troy was the site of a war that raged for 10 years between the Trojans and the Greeks. While we don't know how much of the story is real, or even if the characters in the story existed, archaeologists have rediscovered the incredible city. Believe it or not, it still stands, just under a different name. Today, Troy, or rather its ruins, can be found at the site of Hisarlik. Its history goes back 4,000 years, though it was 2,700 years ago when the Greeks were colonizing a lot of the Turkish west coast. In the 19th century, the scholar and archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann did excavations in Hisarlik and discovered treasures that he believed came from King Priam of Troy, detailed by Homer in his epic story. What's really amazing is that at least 10 cities have stood where Troy once was. Whenever one city was destroyed, another was built in its place. This has left nearly a dozen layers of ruined cities for archaeologists to dig through. It probably started as a settlement and then grew larger and larger before finally reaching its prime after 2550 BC. This was when the huge wall around the city was built, and it stood high and proud until the Greeks came up with their famous treacherous horse. Kalibangan. Deep in the middle of the desert in Rajasthan, India, archaeologists have found evidence that ancient settlers once thrived in this barren land. People lived here for roughly 4,700 years. Archaeologists found evidence of some of the earliest plowed agricultural fields anywhere in the country. The Gagar River that once made the lands fertile has now dried up, but it was once a source of life for these mysterious desert people. The lost city that has been rediscovered here is called Kalibangan, and it was inhabited probably during two different periods, the pre-Harappan and the Harappan. The first group worked the field back around the year 2700 BC. The site was rediscovered in modern times by the Italian researcher Luigi Pio Tessitori in 1917, but it wasn't identified as a Harappan site for another 30 years. Then from between 1961 to 69, the Archaeological Survey of India excavated the place and realized they had stumbled upon a provincial capital of one of the greatest civilizations that ever lived, the Indus Valley Civilization. In the year 2700 BC, scholars believe the people living here experienced a massive earthquake that caused the residents of the ancient city to flee. The site remained abandoned until much later. When the people finally came back, they turned Kalibangan into a fortified city with spacious courtyards, drainage systems, and mysterious altars spread across town that were probably used for ritualistic purposes. Archaeologists just can't say yet what kind of rituals these mysterious people participated in. Lost Egyptian City. The discovery of a lost city in Egypt is so impressive that it's been labeled the most extraordinary find since the tomb of the boy king Tutankhamun. Since the discovery is so new, it will take years to fully understand the enormity of this discovery. The city is called Aten, and its history goes back 3,000 years. The city was established during Egypt's 18th dynasty by the powerful ruler King Amenhotep III. At the time, Aten was probably the largest industrial settlement anywhere in the world, located by what is today the ancient city of Luxor. This was a time when the Egyptian Empire was at its wealthiest. What's really amazing is that the city was discovered by accident. Archaeologists had been searching for the mortuary temple of King Tut when they found this place. The team then found foundations made of mud bricks and realized they were toiling in the middle of a massive city with its walls and buildings still preserved beneath the dirt. After digging, they found many of the buildings here to be nearly complete, with tall walls, rooms filled with ordinary tools used by people in their daily lives, and even mysterious artifacts. They found rings, scarabs, hieroglyphic inscriptions on many surfaces, a bakery, a kitchen with ovens and pieces of pottery for storing food, and so much more. But what exactly happened to the people who lived here? Archaeologists don't know just yet. Although they've been able to date the city based on artifacts they found, they still don't know how it managed to be buried and lost for thousands of years. Kalakumul. Kalakumul is located in the Mexican state of Campeche, about 22 miles from the border with Guatemala. Today, Kalakumul is home to monkeys and around 230 species of birds, and it's overgrown by the hungry jungle. The ruins here are remote and beautiful, and according to archaeologists, they represent a unique settlement that was lost to history for hundreds of years. In ancient Maya, Kalakumul translates roughly to the city of the two adjacent pyramids. The city probably stood for at least 1,200 years, from between 550 BC and 900 AD. It was in the center of the Mayan region, meaning the people who lived here would have been influenced by the cities to the north and to the south. They probably operated as part of a coalition of other Maya settlements like El Mirador and Nakbe. Between 500 and 800 AD, this city had about 50,000 inhabitants and over 6,700 structures, covering an area of 27 square miles. Archaeologists say only a portion of the city was actually open to the public, as much of it was reserved for the governing body of the region, such as the rulers and the high priests. Still, this ancient city held sway over roughly 1.5 million people living along its outskirts. So why was it abandoned? Like much of the Maya kingdom, Kalakumul just kind of fell into disrepair. The people left, and it was abandoned, not discovered again until modern times. The sunken city of Poseidon. The lost city of Helike has been described as the real-life Atlantis of ancient Greece. It was destroyed by an earthquake in the year 373 BC. After the earthquake, a tsunami pulled the ancient city into the water and submerged it completely in the Gulf of Corinth, erasing this powerful port city from the earth. It's believed that the city was founded in the Bronze Age and was the leader of something called the Achaean League, a kind of band of port cities ranging all the way to Asia Minor. The destruction of Helike was so dramatic and well known at the time that it was written down by plenty of Roman and Greek authors, so historians have a pretty solid understanding of what happened. It's believed that Plato was actually inspired by the sinking of Helike when he came up with the myth of Atlantis. This might actually have been the Atlantis that Plato was talking about. Even after its destruction, Helike remained a point of interest for hundreds of years. Greeks who visited the site 150 years after the disaster claimed that the massive bronze statue of Poseidon could still be seen mostly submerged, and that his trident was causing a problem for fishermen and their nets. All mention of the city ceased at around 174 AD, when the last traces of it were submerged. It wasn't until 1861 that a German archaeologist discovered a bronze coin with the head of Poseidon on it, likely from Helike. But it still wasn't until the 1960s that archaeologists were able to actually dive off the coast of Greece and rediscover this fascinating lost place. Scarra Bray. Scarra Bray is a prehistoric village in Scotland that was rediscovered thousands of years after it was lost, thanks to a horrible winter storm that battered Orkney back in 1850. The storm, a mix of strong winds and high tides, ripped the grass off of a large mound and revealed the buried Neolithic village beneath. To this day, Scarra Bray is widely considered the most precious prehistoric monument anywhere in Europe. It consists of several stone buildings, like ancient houses that had been built into the grassy hill like hobbit holes. Radiocarbon dating in the 1970s, over 100 years after the first traces of the village were found, finally revealed just how old this place really is. It was probably inhabited for around 600 years, between 3200 and 2200 BC. There are a total of 8 dwellings linked together by covered passages, and amazingly, they all look as though they were abandoned just yesterday because of how well preserved they were kept by being covered in sand and grass. Scarra Bray was abandoned 4,000 years ago, probably because of the encroaching sand dunes. The people living here realized that the sand was soon going to cover up their houses, so they went and built houses somewhere else. And then that's exactly what the sand did, covering their dwellings until the Great Storm of 1850. Acrotiri. The prehistoric settlement of Acrotiri is on the Greek island of Santorini. It was once one of the most important places anywhere in the Aegean Sea. In prehistory, it was a Minoan port town that had connections not only to mainland Greece, but also to places like Egypt and Syria. Today, the town is completely covered in ash because of a volcanic eruption. The city itself dates back at least 6,000 years. It became a main urban center about 2,000 years after. It was one of the most sophisticated places anywhere in the region, with exquisite paintings, an elaborate drainage system, and most of the houses were furnished in high-quality decorations and furniture. Archaeologists have even found imported objects from places like Cyprus and Egypt. Basically, these guys were rich. But what about that volcanic eruption? It happened in the 17th century BC, when a series of major earthquakes forced the inhabitants to evacuate. Shortly after the earthquakes, a volcanic eruption blanketed the town in ash, preserving it forever and earning it the nickname Greek Pompeii. The people here had managed to evacuate, unlike the poor souls who were vaporized at Pompeii. The city was then lost under the ash until modern days, when archaeologists rediscovered it. Konye-Urgench. Konye-Urgench, also known as Old Gurganj, is a modern city in Turkmenistan with about 30,000 people. But the modern town overlaps the ruins of the more ancient settlement beneath. Under the relatively modern structures of this forgotten place, the ruins of the old capital of Khwarezm, once part of the mighty Akamenid Empire, lie largely unexplored. Nobody knows exactly when the town was founded. Archaeological evidence suggests the first structures were built somewhere around the 5th century BC. We know the area was conquered by the Arabs in 712 AD, and that Old Gurganj rose to prominence for 400 years, starting in the 10th century. Genghis Khan burned it to the ground in 1221, and it was later rebuilt. described in the 14th century by a mystic traveler named Ibn Battuta as the most beautiful and important city of the Turks. The area experienced a bit more blood and war, especially in 1373 when it was attacked by Timur and forced to surrender. The Turkmen people then inhabited this ancient place until the 1700s, when it was completely abandoned and left undisturbed and unseen by human eyes for another 300 years. That is, until 2005, when archaeologists began excavating and learning more about this old city. The mask from Provadia. A very strange little prehistoric mask has just been uncovered in Bulgaria. With large dark eyes and no mouth, many people think it is eerily similar to an alien. This unique mask was discovered at Europe's oldest mining center in Provadia, with a prehistoric settlement known as the Salt Pit. It's the earliest known prehistoric town on the continent, dating back to the 4th or 5th millennium BC. The archaeologists who found it said that it has holes in it so that it could be worn around the face like a mask, or as a type of necklace like an amulet. The face has eyebrows, a streamlined nose, elliptical eyes, and was probably a type of status symbol of someone who worshipped the sun. The eyes and facial features are clearly carved and polished, and there is probably an important reason the mask has no mouth. We just don't know what it is. However, it is clear that whoever made it without one on purpose. Although they are unsure of the symbolism behind the artifact, they also think that its distinctly shaped eyes and the vertical bands carved beneath them represent something specific, maybe some type of animal or god. Provadia Solnitsata is extremely old and was just recently discovered in 2012. The people here were building complex structures and mining salt before the invention of the wheel. It was first inhabited by a late Chalcolithic society that became rich as a salt production center. The site predates the beginnings of Greek civilization by over 1,000 years. Residents collected salt water from nearby springs and boiled it in ceramic bowls. The water evaporated, and the end product was a chunk of salt ready to hit the trade market. What's left of the town today consists of some homes, a collection of pits that were possibly used for rituals, fortification walls, and a gate. More than 3,000 gold objects were found at an ancient cemetery near the site. They may be connected to Solnitsata and might be some of the treasures the ancient people left behind. Little else is known about the people who lived here. Roman coffins with Celtic decorations. In 2019, archaeologists discovered 2 decorated Roman lead coffins at a quarry in Surrey, England. Only a few hundred such burials are known to exist throughout Britain. The coffins were found with other graves in a small L-shaped cemetery. Measuring 6.2 feet long by 1.5 feet wide, they were made from sheets of cast lead. Both caskets bear images of scallop shells within triangles. Scallops are commonly seen on Roman coffins and are believed to symbolize the journey into the underworld, according to current archaeology. But the ones seen on these coffins may be Romano-Celtic in nature, in which case they represent fertility and rebirth. Traces of wood indicate that the caskets were once encased in larger wooden boxes that deteriorated over time. One contained an adult and a baby, presumably a mother and her child, while the other held the remains of an adult. Because lead was expensive at the time of the burials, it's likely that the individuals were from the upper class, and that the coffins were a display of their elite status. The caskets became distorted over the centuries, with the weight of the earth causing the lids to cave in and soil to pour into the burials. Studying the bones was difficult and revealed very little. But the imagery proved valuable in helping researchers learn more about Roman-era Britain, when many Celtic tribes became at least partially Romanized. Based on the findings, it appears as though these groups adopted some Roman traditions, like the lead casket, while retaining some of their own. Lady of Baza. While excavating a pre-Roman settlement in Spain in 1971, a worker struck a hard object. It was a 4-foot-tall funerary statue of a woman dating back nearly 2,500 years. Discovered near the modern-day city of Baza, the limestone sculpture depicts an elaborately dressed woman sitting on a throne. Nicknamed the Lady of Baza, it contains traces of bright pigments that it was once painted with. Inside the statue, archaeologists found cremated human remains dating back to around 380 BC. This and other similar Bronze Age Iberian sculptures are all shrouded in mystery, but the Lady of Baza may provide researchers with intriguing clues to her identity and what Iberian society was like back in the day. The Iberian culture emerged around 1000 BC from the previous Argar society. Composed of skilled metalworkers, the society became wealthy through trade with people from the eastern Mediterranean. The Iberian language is largely undeciphered, leaving experts to rely on artifacts for insight into their life. Found surrounded by grave goods in what was once an Iberian capital, the Lady of Baza was probably an aristocrat. She was buried with an array of items indicating her high social standing, including ceramic pots and metal weapons. Carved from a single stone block, the sculpture bears traces of Greek and Phoenician influence. This makes sense since the Iberians traded extensively with Carthage and a newly established Phoenician capital at the time the statue was made. The Iberian culture disappeared upon Roman conquest, leaving little surviving evidence behind. Rare discoveries like the Lady of Baza are critical to improving our understanding of the ancient civilization. Khiladi Civilization. Excavations in several villages throughout Tamil Nadu, India, have increasingly made headlines in recent years for discoveries of artifacts from the enigmatic Khiladi Civilization. Some of the objects date as far back as 850 BC, and it's believed that the sites may have been occupied by humans as early as 2,600 years ago. Earlier this year, archaeologists unearthed 25 burial urns at one Khiladi site, which they believe was a cemetery. It's been suggested that the civilization descended from the Harappan culture, and DNA tests are being performed on the remains in hopes of learning more about their origins. A rusted 16-inch dagger was recently found in a burial urn. It was broken in half, but part of its wooden handle remained intact. The weapon dates back to the Sangam period, which lasted from the 3rd century BC to the 3rd century AD. The digs have also turned up cow, ox, buffalo, and goat remains, showing that the Khiladi people had domesticated animals and farmed. Around 500 BC, the society experienced an agricultural boom that enabled growth and gave rise to new urban centers. Evidence of production includes spinning and weaving equipment, cloth dyeing tools, ceramic workshops, and brick kilns. But it wasn't all work and no play for the Khiladi, who played board games and inscribed their pottery with the Tamil Brahmi script, an early script that was used for writing during the Old Tamil period. The artifacts that have been unearthed so far show that the Khiladi people were self-sustaining, industrious, and a literate early urban society. But experts still have a lot to learn about this little-studied ancient civilization. And now for number 6. But first, I want to give a big shout out to Dirty Nikki and Scott Allison. Thanks so much for supporting this channel, and be sure to let us know what other things you would like to see in the comments below. If you want to see more videos about discoveries and archaeology, hit that subscribe button before you leave. Mystery Woman. After purchasing a vintage camera in 2015, Irish camera collector William Fagan noticed that there was an undeveloped roll of film inside, but it wasn't until last year that he finally got around to developing it. The result was a collection of 22 photos featuring a glamorous young woman who he is hoping someone can help him identify. The images show the beautiful lady posing on a deserted street in northern Italy, in a mid-1930s BMW cabriolet in Switzerland, besides a lake at an unknown location, and in a handful of other places in Europe. She appeared to be traveling with an older, more camera-shy gentleman. Fagan told CNN that he felt like he was intruding on someone's personal life by looking at the photos, but he ironically decided to release them to the public in hopes of finding out who they belonged to. He believes the images date back to the 1950s, which means that the people in them could still be alive. Some people speculated that the couple may have been famous, while others suspected that they are long-lost relatives of their family. Last year, Fagan said that he hopes to get one step closer to solving the mystery by contacting BMW enthusiast clubs with the license plate information from one of the photos. In the meantime, he is taking all the help he can get from the public. The photographer is doing what he calls photographic archaeology, which he is really passionate about. With any luck, or perhaps some more digging, he'll hopefully reunite the couple or their surviving loved ones with some recently rediscovered long-lost memories. The Trojan Horse. Has the horse of legend finally been found? While excavating the ancient city of Troy in modern-day Turkey recently, archaeologists found what they believe are the remnants of the famous Trojan horse. Discovered on the hills of Hisarlik, the fascinating find came in the form of a large wooden structure assembled from dozens of strangely positioned fir planks. Each beam measures up to 49 feet long. Radiocarbon dating tests put the suspected horse's construction sometime during the 12th or 11th centuries BC, And according to experts, this date aligns with the recorded dates for the Trojan War. Until recently, most researchers considered the Trojan Horse to be a mythical structure, and this discovery could prove to be a game changer in our understanding of this chapter in history. Homer's epic poems The Iliad and the Odyssey recount the story of the Trojan War. Oddly, they do not mention the horse, and the Iliad concludes before the war's end. The Trojan horse is also detailed in the Aeneid by Virgil, which was written during the reign of the Roman Emperor Augustus. Historians believed that Virgil's reference to the horse was metaphorical in nature, perhaps relating to a natural disaster or a war machine. They are rethinking this theory now that the possible remnants of the horse have been found. The structure fits the ancient writer's description, indicating that his intentions were quite literal rather than an analogy. In addition to the horse, archaeologists found a gold plate that was mentioned in the epic poem Post-Homerica by Quintus Smyrnaeus. Just like the text mentions, the plate is inscribed with the words, "For their return home, the Greeks dedicate this offering to Athena." For some time, experts were unsure whether Troy itself ever existed. Research has come a long way in recent years by not only proving that the city itself was real, but that the Trojan War and many of the stories about it were also built on truth. Suntaka Grave. Over 50 years ago, back in 1968, archaeologists in southern Finland discovered an intriguing 1,000-year-old burial called the Suntaka Grave. It contained human remains, a sword with a bronze handle, another weapon, and feminine jewelry, all signs that the person was highly respected within their community. The grave's occupant was dressed in womanly attire, with a sword at their left hip, and was laid to rest on a soft feather blanket. The weaponry indicated a man, but the clothing and jewelry sort of hinted towards a woman. So who was buried here? Researchers theorized that perhaps the burial contained two people, or that it was the grave of a powerful female who was in a leadership position, defying the gender norms of the late Iron Age. A solid explanation was lacking until this year, when scientists performed an analysis of badly damaged DNA collected from the remains. They confirmed that the burial contained just one person and found evidence of Klinefelter syndrome, a condition characterized by the presence of two X chromosomes and one Y chromosome, rather than the standard X and Y. While the symptoms vary, it's possible that the individual exhibited seemingly male and female traits. This would explain their mixture of grave goods, and also serves as evidence that the community must have understood on some level the combination of masculine and feminine so long ago. A crazy beast among dinosaurs. A strange and unusual large mammal dubbed Adalatherium, or crazy beast, once lived with the dinosaurs. After studying the bizarre creature's remains for 20 years, researchers recently released their findings, finally. They described the specimen as the most complete mammal from before the dinosaurs' extinction ever found in the southern hemisphere. The possum-sized creature was much larger than most other mammals of its time, which were typically the size of shrews or mice. It had strong hind limbs similar to those of a modern-day crocodile, front teeth like a rabbit, more trunk vertebrae than most of today's mammals, and back teeth unlike any known living or extinct mammal. The crazy beast emerged into existence around 145 million years ago on what is now the island of Madagascar. In fact, by then, Madagascar was already an island. The species belonged to the extinct Gondwanatheria mammal group, which had a widespread presence throughout the supercontinent of Gondwana, but its isolation on Madagascar might explain its unique anatomy. Despite the extensive study, however, the creature's placement on the mammal family tree remains undetermined. Experts are also baffled about how the crazy beast evolved. At first glance, it resembles a modern-day badger, but it's unclear how the animal moved with its sprawling back legs and tucked-in front legs. The creature's teeth also pose more questions than answers. Its back chompers are so out of the ordinary that scientists would have been unable to identify the animal based on the teeth alone. And there's an unexplained hole between the bones at the top of the snout. The most definitive conclusion that can be drawn from these fascinating findings is that the scientific community still has a lot to learn when it comes to our planet's earliest creatures. Saka warrior people. Central Asia was once home to a mysterious warrior tribe called the Saka people, who thrived between the 8th and 3rd centuries BC. This little-studied civilization is best known for gold artifacts excavated from burial mounds in modern-day Kazakhstan, where warriors were laid to rest with their horses. Sadly, many of the graves were looted, but the burial of a teenage archer was found intact, thanks to rockfall that effectively hid his grave from view for 2,500 years. He was 18 years old at the most when he died, and was buried with a female relative. Their tomb was discovered and excavated over the last 3 years, and it's only the second intact Saka burial ever found. Dozens of these grave goods will soon go on display in a reconstruction of the archer's grave at the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge, England. In addition to being skilled warriors, the Saka people were talented artisans who worked with gold and other metals. The bulk of the artifacts that archaeologists have uncovered came from 3 different burial complexes in Kazakhstan. While hundreds of items might seem like a lot, it's actually not much when it comes to learning about an entire culture. For now, experts admittedly have more questions than answers about this enigmatic but fascinating culture. Headless Buddha. While renovating an apartment complex in the city of Chongqing in southwestern China, workers discovered a 30-foot-tall religious statue hidden behind a thick wall of foliage. The moss-covered sculpture had gone undetected for quite some time. After its discovery, it went viral overnight on Chinese social media, quickly earning itself a reputation as the Buddha. Experts believe that the nearly forgotten statue was built sometime between 1912 and 1949, during China's Republican era. It was likely destroyed during the 1950s, roughly 30 years before the surrounding apartment complexes were built. And contrary to its nickname, the statue is not of Buddhist origin, but was inspired by a folk religion, according to researchers. The district government told local media that a Taoist temple dedicated to the god of thunder once stood near the artifact, but that the temple was dismantled in 1987. And although the statue fell into obscurity, it's actually a designated cultural relic. Like many cities throughout China, Chongqing is rapidly expanding. In recent decades, countless structures have been built to accommodate the region's burgeoning population of 30 million and counting. Discoveries like the statue, which became hidden quite quickly and easily, point toward the possible nearby presence of other forgotten artifacts and ruins. Urban expansion has the power to destroy archaeological gems, but when it's done right, it is also a great way to uncover secrets from the past. Number 10. Cretan Hieroglyphs. In ancient Greece, hieroglyphs were being used at around the same time that Egypt was using a similar script. These hieroglyphs were ancient characters used to represent either a sound, a word, or just a syllable. The Cretan hieroglyphs were invented by the Minoan civilization way back in the early Bronze Age. The Minoans themselves existed between 2700 BC and 1100 BC. Making their mysterious writing system one of the oldest in the world. The Minoan civilization was the foundation of the future of ancient Greek and Roman culture. Based on the written texts found on ancient artifacts, archaeologists have found various scripts. So Minoan is either an unclassified language or perhaps multiple languages using the same script. Separated into Linear A and Linear B, Linear A has mostly been found on clay tablets and consists of about 80 signs representing distinct syllables. While Linear A has been partially deciphered, Linear B remains a complete mystery. One of the reasons the hieroglyphs used by the ancient Minoans are so interesting is that they can only be found on the island of Crete. The Minoans were an island people who flourished and prospered to levels unseen by many of their coastal neighbors. These hieroglyphs have been found at a few specific places on the island. At the Malia Palace, in Knossos, and at Petras. Knossos is the most important archaeological site in Crete. Most archaeologists agree that it is the oldest city anywhere in Europe, which is quite impressive seeing that it was on an island. It appears that there's just something about being secluded that helped ancient civilizations to really blossom. The script found in Knossos dates back to between 1800 and 1450 BC. It was found written on clay documents, carved in gemstones, and left scrawled in stone. However, archaeologists still haven't been able to fully decipher it. For some reason, Linear A was replaced by Linear B in 1400 BC, making archaeologists think something drastic may have happened during this time. Right now, researchers are working hard to reconstruct the language and unlock more secrets of this lost civilization. The Singapore Stone. The Singapore Stone is an ancient relic discovered, as you can probably guess, in Singapore. It happened back in 1819 when a large boulder was discovered covered in bizarre markings that nobody could decipher. Then, in 1843, the stone was blown apart to make the mouth of the Singapore River wider. The Singapore Stone was taken and stored at the National Museum of Singapore, where it remains today. But here's the deal. Nobody knows who made the Singapore Stone or what is written upon the rock. It's made of coarse sandstone, and the original boulder, before it was blown apart, stood 9 feet high. In total, there were 50 lines of inscriptions that archaeologists still believe hold the secrets to the ancient history of Singapore. It could have been the ancient Majapahit civilization that created the rock, though nobody can be certain. The first earnest study of the rock fragment was done by the Dutch scholar Hans Kern. He allegedly deciphered a few words and was able to date the inscriptions to 1230 AD. But this is just speculation, since he couldn't seem to decipher anything else. As for the Majapahit, they used the Sanskrit script between the 12th and 14th centuries, suggesting whatever was written on the stone could have been an earlier, more primitive form of the language. The Majapahit occupied much of Southeast Asia, with their empire based on the Indonesian island of Java. They disappeared around the year 1550. Chinese gold bar cipher. In 1996, the curator of a museum in the United States came across 7 gold bars from China that were given to a general in 1933. These mysterious bars have pictures, Chinese writing, some form of script writing, and cryptograms in Latin letters, making it one of the most interesting uncracked codes. The International Association for Cryptologic Research agreed to take a look at the mysterious inscriptions to see if they could figure it out. The details of the gold bars themselves are a little shaky. They were allegedly given to someone named General Wang in Shanghai. The Chinese writing is the only thing on the bars that has been translated, but it only mentions that the gold bars weigh 1.8 kilograms. It doesn't really help decipher the rest of the puzzle. It appears to be some form of metal bank deposit certificate, but that doesn't make much sense. And there's a bit more to this mystery than just the undeciphered writing. Nobody can figure out if these gold bars actually exist. For one, nobody knows which museum is holding on to them. Plus, the gold bars have 1948 written on them, but nobody is sure what the context is. They apparently were made prior to 1933, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. There are many pictures online showing the gold bars photographed against a dark background, but so far no one has been able to come up with what the encrypted lines mean. Meroitic script. The Nubian Empire was located just south of Egypt in what is today Sudan. The origins of this mighty empire go all the way back to the Stone Age with the Kerma culture. They were one of the most important civilizations anywhere in the ancient world. The Nubian Empire fell apart around 330 AD, with their last capital being the city of Meroe, where there are still dozens of black pyramids standing in the desert sands. But besides just being a powerful empire that built more pyramids even than Egypt, the Nubians also created what might be the first written language ever used in Africa. It's known today as the Meroitic script. In 671 BC, the Assyrians conquered Egypt. The Kushites withdrew from the Egyptian border and established their capital in Meroe. Because of how connected Nubia and Egypt had been, they were already using hieroglyphics in Nubia. But with the arrival of the Assyrians, they realized they needed to distinguish themselves from Egypt and protect their secrets from the foreign invaders. So they took the hieroglyphics they had been using and tweaked them to create a new language, a completely distinct script that used only 23 basic symbols in the alphabet. This was probably the first alphabet system in Africa that used vowel sounds, something not even the Egyptians did. But here's how good of a job the Nubians did. To this day, scholars have yet to fully decipher their language. The Nubians wanted to create a script so complicated that the Assyrians couldn't decipher it, and it worked. The first Meroitic inscriptions were found back in the early 1900s, and now, over 200 years later, scientists are still stumped. Oldest undeciphered language. Sitting in a room at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford are clay tablets which contain the oldest undeciphered language in the world, Proto-Elamite. According to the museum, these tablets date back to before 3000 BC. That makes them over 5,000 years old. The artifacts come from what is modern Iran and were likely created during the Banesh period, when the oldest civilization ever to live in Iran began to take shape. This was in the earliest part of the Bronze Age, with the Proto-Elamite writing system probably being used for a brief time before the Elamite cuneiform was invented. Over 1,600 tablets have been found in Iran with this script on them, and yet nobody has ever been able to decipher the language. Proto-Elamite may have been used for around 500 years before true Elamite came into existence, which was then used for 2,000 years, and was even one of the official languages of the Akamenid Empire of Persia. But the origins of the language are just as mysterious as whatever is written on the clay tablets. Some scholars believe it was derived from the Dravidian languages of southern India, like Tamil. Others say it has its origins in the Indus Valley with the Harappan civilization. But no matter where the language came from, it doesn't change the fact that even with all of the technology we have today, our best scientists still can't decipher it, and this is actually hindering them from learning more about the earliest people to live in Iran. The Voynich Manuscript. The Voynich Manuscript is a bizarre medieval codex that nobody seems to know what to do with. The manuscript is full of fantastic drawings, its pages are filled with writing in an unknown language, and every last expert who has tried to break open its secrets has failed. The manuscript itself is stored at Yale University in the Rare Book and Manuscript Library. It's a codex or illuminated manuscript made up of 240 pages, but every single one of them is filled with mystery. Nobody knows exactly when it was created or what it was intended to convey. There are images of decapitated heads, floating castles, flowers that seem to have been inspired by alien life forms, and a whole lot of nude women bathing. Even the famous cryptologist Alan Turing of the FBI was stumped when he tried to figure out what the language in the book was, and he was supposedly the best. The unknown script consists of an alphabet that has not been seen anywhere else in the world, making it indecipherable. The best theory put forth so far is that the manuscript was supposed to be a representation of all knowledge from the time gathered together in one place. As the Art newspaper reports, one theory proposed by German Egyptologist Rainer Hanig is that it is written in a Semitic language such as Arabic or Hebrew, languages spoken by European scholars of the Middle Ages. After identifying a connection between certain Voynich characters and Hebrew, he managed to translate the first words and then full sentences. He believes that the book contains botanical and medical texts, but that it will take several years to decipher. The illuminated manuscript is named after Wilfrid Voynich, a rare book stealer who purchased the book in Rome in 1912. Before that, it belonged to the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II and probably John Dee, the infamous astrologer at British Queen Elizabeth I's court. Time will tell if the German Egyptologist has finally uncovered the secrets to the magical manuscript. The Casca Hal Block. The Casca Hal Block is a writing tablet covered in strange characters unlike anything seen in Mesoamerica. The block was discovered in the heartland of the ancient Olmec people. Archaeologists have dated it back to 900 BC, and if correct, the dating would make this block the earliest evidence of writing found anywhere in Mesoamerica, though archaeologists have no idea what it says. We know that the Maya created their own language, and other cultures in the area had their own scripts, but this isn't like any of the others. There are 62 characters, and nobody knows what any of them mean. The script is also unusual because the symbols are running in horizontal rows, and there doesn't appear to be any form of organization. The sequences seem random and incongruent. Additionally, the characters show no resemblance to other glyphs used by the Olmec, leading some to speculate that the glyphs found on the stone were the earliest form of writing used by this culture, up until 500 BC, until they developed a more sophisticated language before vanishing mysteriously about 100 years later. What's bizarre is that the Epi-Olmec culture that came after, lasting from between 300 BC to 250 AD, had a fully fledged writing system known as the Isthmian script, yet it has absolutely nothing to do with the Casca Hal Block. Rongo script. The Rongo script is a form of writing discovered in the 19th century on the mysterious Easter Island. The explorer Eugene Urod landed on the island back in 1864 and discovered bizarre inscriptions carved into stone. He counted a total of 26 wooden objects covered in text that could not be deciphered at the time. In fact, they still haven't been deciphered. The symbols just don't seem to make any sense. The characters look like a weird mixture between animals and plants and geometric shapes. There are 120 of them, mainly things that look like birds. However, there are 480 glyphs in total believed to be variants of the main 120. So who created this mysterious script? These days, the people of Easter Island typically use Spanish or their native Rapa Nui language. The Rongo Rongo script was used up until the 1860s, at which point all knowledge of the language and its origin was lost. The language was probably brought to the island with the original founders of the Rapa Nui, though it's believed they came from Polynesia, and no similar language has been found beyond the rocky shores of the island. In other words, nobody knows. The Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone is arguably the most photographed object in the British Museum. It's a huge stone slab with a message carved into it, written in 3 different forms of writing. It was the Rosetta Stone that allowed historians to finally decode ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. This is because the same message is written on the stone in different languages, in hieroglyphics, Demotic, and Ancient Greek. At the time it was discovered in Egypt by soldiers in Napoleon Bonaparte's army, nobody knew how to read hieroglyphics. But by comparing the Egyptian with the Greek, seeing as the exact same thing was written in both languages, experts were able to figure it out. The stone was found at the city of Rosetta sometime between 1798 and 1801. After Napoleon was defeated, the British went ahead and kept the stone for themselves and put it in their museum. The writing on the Rosetta Stone is a decree written by a council of priests on the anniversary of the King Ptolemy V's coronation in 196 BC. It was basically them saying that they support the new king, and so should everyone else. And even though the Rosetta Stone has been fully deciphered, it's still considered by many to be one of the most mysterious relics that's ever been successfully decoded. The Pyramid Texts. The Pyramid Texts are considered to be the oldest religious writings in Egypt, and possibly the oldest sacred texts anywhere in the world. Egyptologists for a long time have believed that these texts, which have been found scrawled on the insides of tombs, on the lids of sarcophagi, and even on the walls of pyramids, are ancient spells. They date back to the Old Kingdom, with the oldest of them being made in 2400 BC. That's nearly 4,500 years ago. The texts are easy enough to decipher since they're written in Old Egyptian, but it's their meaning that has scientists stumped. The texts were originally put inside the pyramids of kings and queens. Then, during the Middle Kingdom of between 2055 and 1650 BC, they weren't written in the pyramids at all. Finally, in the era of the New Kingdom between 1550 and 1070 BC, the text showed up in the tombs of officials, not kings. Nobody is really sure why the use of the pyramid text changed over the years, but the purpose likely remained the same. The texts were probably spells meant to enable the transformation of the dead, so that when they reached the afterlife, they could mingle with the gods. Thanks for watching! If you want to learn more about undeciphered codes and ancient languages, let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe for more videos like these. See you soon! Bye!